What is the strongest bone in the human body? Is the question that I will answer by the end of the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of The More You Know Mondays. The more you know, the more you grow. And this week on the show, I will be talking about Nichelle Nichols. But before we get into that, you know what we have to do. We have to start off this show with some positive vibes. And I do that every week in the form of a quote. This week's quote is by Mel Robbins, and it goes like this: inhale courage, exhale fear. And I love that quote, or this quote, because it's kind of similar to my mantra at this moment in time. I feel like to get things done, you have to inhale the courage of what you're doing and feeling that you're on the right on the right track. You have to have that self-belief is what I mean. And then exhale the fear as you go forward, knowing that you might not be sure about what you are doing or what you are about to embark on, but you know that if you inhale fear, you're going to stop yourself from doing anything. So the only way to really propel yourself forward would be to inhale the courage to do the things that you want to do, instead of not doing the things that you want to do because you're scared about what other people might think or what you might come out looking like. And it's all, I feel like most fears are mainly worried about what other people might think of you. And if you spend your life worrying about what other people think of you, then you're not spending any time on yourself, which is kind of defeating the object, because you live in your own body. So you should spend most of your time worried about yourself and what you want. Because sometimes I feel like we forget about our own needs and worry about what other people might want or need from us. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying, in the sense of, I'm not saying that you should go around and be selfish and not think about anyone at all. There needs to be a nice balance in the whole thing. But the main point of the quote, because I feel like I've gone off tangent a tiny bit, is to do things that you want to do, you have to breathe out the fear and inhale the courage to do it, because only you are in control of your own destiny. Other people can be the puppeteers along your journey, but in the end, you're the one that will break free of the strings and want to figure out things on your own. And the only way to do that is by taking yourself out of the shelter that's been put up around you, containing you and keeping you safe from any harm, which is your fear. Because your fear is, what if I go outside of my bubble and things don't work out the way that I planned them? Well, unfortunately, that's life. Sometimes things don't go the way that you planned them. So usually you have to figure out a better way or another way of getting the same thing that you want. It doesn't always have to be a thing of, oh, I didn't make it this time, so I'm just going to give up. No, it just means maybe we try it in a different way. Maybe there's a a way that we haven't looked at this, so we can maybe do it in that way, and maybe it'll work, and we don't know until we try. But anyway, that has been Monday's motivations and affirmations. And I think that the only thing that I am saying in the end, or in all this, inhaling courage and exhaling of fear, is anything that you want to do, you can do. It just matters the limitations that you put around yourself. If you extend your limitations to being anything is possible, then, you don't know what could be possible because you haven't done it yet. And until you do it, you don't know what could come when you reach that feet or that foot or that place. But yeah, hopefully that inspires and motivates you this Monday or whatever day you listen to this. But let's get into the show. So, as I was saying before, this week I am talking about Nichelle Nichols. I think that's how you say her name. But she, for anyone that is not familiar of who she is, she became most famous for her role as Nyota Yura in Star Trek. And I'll get into that soon. The reason why I wanted to do this episode on her was last Monday when I released Max and Kira's Law, episode 9, I was on Instagram and I was watching this drunk history episode of loads of different spliced together scenes of Martin Luther King, and people telling stories from drunk history. I don't know if you've seen drunk history, but basically celebrities get drunk and recant and talk about historical events, or they say it in their own words while they're drunk. It's kind of funny, but then also historical at the same time. So you learn while you're laughing. Pretty funny. Pretty good. I recommend checking it out if you haven't watched it already. But anyway, there was a clip of Martin Luther King when someone was telling a story about Nichelle Nichols. And I watched it and I was just like, oh, I didn't even know all these things about her. So I wanted to share what I found out. I don't know how many other people have seen it. But the reason why it was a poignant point for me to mention also Martin Luther King was because on the Monday the 18th of January was Martin Luther King's birthday. And surprisingly, I knew that this year because it was on the calendar. It said US, and I was just like, oh, that's pretty dope. I didn't even know it was his birthday in January. So that's another cool fact if you didn't know that. But yeah, so Nichelle Nichols. She was actually born Grace Dell Nichols, and she was born on the 28th of December, 1932, which is, I don't want to do some quick maths, but what we're in 2021, that's probably about 88 years ago. So she's 88 years old. Let me just have a little quick look and ding, 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 ding. I'm 100% right. That could be because I already knew because I'd done the research before this episode or because I'd done some quick maths. But either way, whatever you want to believe, it was 88 years ago and I was right. So anyway, the reason why I wanted to mainly talk about it is because of the huge impact that Nyota Yura, I hope that's the way to say it, that's her character from Star Trek. It is the huge impact that her character had for the African American community, like black people everywhere, really and truly. In the sense of when she became the Lieutenant Yura, sorry. She was one of the first black women to feature in a major television series. So that point in time, she was the first. And when I kind of found that out or heard that, I was like, wow. So the first ever black woman to be on a major television series was Star Trek. And maybe I did know that, and maybe I hadn't, but it's kind of, I don't know, kind of cool being a little bit of a nerd like that. It took something as far out as Star Trek to have the first black female on a major television series. And Star Trek started in 1966, which is coincidentally the same year that England won the World Cup for the first and only time. So, as you can see, it was the starting of a changing world as the British Empire slowly lost its power. Sorry. Maybe that was a terrible joke, but it sounded really good in my head. Anyway, let's get on with the show if I can get my words out. So, the reason why I felt that it was kind of interesting, this connection with Martin Luther King and Nichelle Nichols, was just the fact of, in the Drunk History episode, which was also in my research, which I found, I didn't just watch the episode of Drunk History in its entirety because it was just a clip which I found on Instagram. So, I mean, I did watch the Drunk History episode in its entirety, but I did also read things and do actual research. So, I mean, what? Not to say that you can't do research by watching things. You can do plenty of research watching things, but I feel like I do more work if I'm actually reading something as opposed to just watching it and taking it in. Unless I watch and do. I think I'm digging myself a hole of confusion. Because it all sounds like the same thing. But anyway, in Nichelle Nichols' first year of filming the series of Star Trek, she was tempted to leave the series because she wanted to pursue her career on the Broadway, but it wasn't until she had a conversation with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is what changed her mind. So she was at an NAACP fundraiser, and for anyone that doesn't know what that is, the NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is a civil rights organization in the USA, which was formed in 1909 as an interracial endeavor to advance justice for African Americans. So this organization, the civil rights organization, was having a fundraiser, and Nichelle Nichols was there. Obviously I just said that. And she was told that there was this huge fan that really wanted to speak to her. So she was just like, alright, cool. It must be just a Trekkie or something. And to her surprise, she looked across the room and she saw Dr. Martin Luther King walking towards her. And he had a huge grin on his face, and he was just reached out his hand to Nichelle Nichols and was said to her that he was her biggest fan And he also told her that Star Trek was the one and only show that him and his wife, Coretta, would allow their 3 children to stay up and watch. And she then told Martin Luther King that she was thinking about leaving Star Trek. And she never even got to tell him the reason why, because he just cut in and told her that she can't quit because she's a part of history. He told her that she couldn't give up because she was playing a vital role model for black children and young women across the country, as well as for other children who would see blacks as equals because they were playing alongside other leading white characters. Which was, hearing about this and reading this, I was just like, whoa, that's hella inspiring to know that she could have, if it wasn't for her being at that NAACP fundraiser and Martin Luther King Jr. also being there and speaking to her and telling her that how inspiring she is to him when he was out there doing many more inspiring things. It kind of inspired her to stay on Star Trek, and inspire generations of people to follow their dreams and know it's possible. People like me, which is why I wanted to tell this story or share this story with more people, because this is hella inspiring. It also mainly is kind of a thing where you don't know where you will be or who you will meet on your journey, but like all it takes is a conversation, a meeting of a person one time that changes your entire outlook of what you're actually doing. She could have gone away from that meeting and that talk with Martin Luther King Jr. and just decided, okay, cool, that's a lot, that's a lot. I don't know what to do with that. I really want to go on Broadway, so I know I could be doing all these great things for other black children and young women across the country, but I really want to do Broadway, so I'm going to go and do Broadway. And this whole story could have gone a completely different way. And we might not be talking about this in the same way. But instead she stayed on, and after speaking with Martin Luther King, she went back to Gene Roddenberry, who is the creator of Star Trek, and she told him, listen man, I was at the NAACP fundraiser, and you never guess who came and spoke to me. Martin Luther King Jr. And she told him what he told her, and he cried. And like, that's kind of beautiful, just to know that he created Star Trek, and by writing the role or even casting the role of Lieutenant Uhura, he made history, as well as Nichelle Nichols making history by playing the role. But he created the character at the same time, so he was the man bold enough to write this script and put it and have it on major television, because he supported what was happening in the world at that time, or even in America, with segregation slowly becoming less prominent. So it's kind of really beautiful if you think about it. And another beautiful moment in history that Star Trek created was the very first interracial kiss on scripted US television, which was between William Shatner, who played James T. Kirk. I love that character in Star Trek. William Shatner's character is classic. And so it was between William Shatner's character and Nichelle Nichols' character. And the kiss was seen as groundbreaking, even though it was portrayed as being forced by alien telekinesis in the episode. There's also another interesting comment that I read. Nichelle Nichols, she said that she received a letter from a white southerner who wrote to her and said in the letter, "I am totally opposed to the mixing of races. However, anytime a red-blooded American boy like Captain Kirk gets a beautiful dame in his arms that looks like Yura, he ain't gonna fight it." What? Which is like I find that quote, that piece of writing from a letter that she got kind of funny, that this guy is like a full-on racist, that he's just like, yo, like, I ain't about this mixing, but like, he couldn't deny that Nichelle Nichols was beautiful. And although he said it in the way of that looks like Yura, well, Nichelle Nichols played Yura, so she looked like Yura. So that means if you want to speak about people that look like her, that would be other black women. He can appreciate beauty, is what he basically said. So I don't know, in a weird way, it sounds like he's a little confused. He's not okay with mixing, but he's okay with Captain Kirk kissing kissing a black lady. So I don't know. Seems like I don't know, a bit more of mental gymnastics for me, because what do you mean? It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, moving on. Despite Star Trek being cancelled in 1969, Miss Nichols continued to, I say Miss Nichols like I know her, Nichelle Nichols, continued to be a part of Star Trek as Star Trek continued to live on. Noteworthy, she was the voice of Nyota Yura in the animated series that came out in 1973. And then she was in the film, which were the first Star Trek film anyway, that came out in 1979, and she was in the second film and the third film and the fourth film. And I mean, she's been in pretty much every Star Trek film, if we want to be honest. And another funny thing for me is, if you think about it, 1966 isn't that long ago. It's only about 50 years ago. So 50 years ago was when the first black female was on a prime major TV series. And since then, how many black female characters have we had on major TV series? So many more. And maybe not just females, men as well, but if we're talking about the first black male actor to have a successful film career, then that would be Stepin Fetchit. But I'm not going to talk too much about him because I will probably talk about him next week. So I don't usually do this and tell people what I'm going to talk about next week, but on doing my research on Nichelle Nichols and finding out that, okay, in 1966 was the first appearance of a black woman on major television, I was curious to see when the first appearance of a black male on a major television show, like in a leading role, was. And through my research, I just typed the question into Google and I stumbled upon this guy and started doing some research and reading about him, and I was like, oh, this is a pretty interesting story. I want to share this with other people. So that will be next week. But back to Nichelle Nichols, which is why I won't go too deep into him. Not right now anyway. But another interesting part of Nichelle Nichols' story from the Drunk History episode that I found was that she also, funnily enough, made a big impact with working with NASA, which when I heard in Drunk History, I was like, really? At the same time, that's still pretty cool, So after Star Trek was cancelled in 1969, she volunteered her time in a special project working with NASA to recruit minority and female personnel for the space agency. And if you think about it, that's kind of cool that from her amazing portrayal of this star captain, or lieutenant rather, on Star Trek, she then, on the flip side, actually worked with NASA on a special program to help them diversify, have more diversity. Maybe that's the correct phrasing I should be looking for. So to help them have more diversity, which is pretty cool, like on the flip, to actually work with NASA. So in the beginnings of her working there, she had an affiliation between NASA and a company which she ran, or which she runs, or helped to run, which is called Women in Motion. And the program was a success. And amongst some of the recruits were Dr. Sally Ride, who was the first American female astronaut and United States Air Force Colonel, Guion Bluford, who was the first African American astronaut, as well as Dr. Judith Resnick and Dr. Reynold McNair, who both flew missions during the Space Shuttle program before their deaths in a Space Shuttle Challenger disaster on January 28th, 1986. So they recruited many, many more people to the program, but those were a few of the noteworthy people that I found out about from the program that Nichelle Nichols helped run with NASA. Another cool Nichelle Nichols and NASA fact is the fact that since the mid-1980s, she's also served on the board of governors of the National Space Society, which is a non-profit educational space advocacy organization which was founded by Dr. Wernher von Braun. Now, I probably should have really started with this point before I started into Star Trek, but I was so inspired by the Star Trek information that I want to kind of start with that. But it was also interesting thing that I found was her first career break, which came in the appearance of a play named Kicks and Co., which was written by Oscar Brown. And although it was a very short run that this play was on, when it first ran in Chicago, it was a kind of a satirical look of the Playboy magazine, in which Nichelle Nichols played Hazel Sharp, who was a voluptuous campus queen who was tempted by the devil and orgy magazines to become the orgy maiden of the month. And funnily enough, since it was when it came out, or when it ended running, Nichelle Nichols actually attracted the attention of Hugh Hefner, who, as we all know, was the publisher of Playboy, or is the publisher of Playboy if it's still around. And then Hugh Hefner booked Nichelle Nichols for his Chicago Playboy Club, because between her acting and singing gigs, she was also a part-time model, which meant that she was also on the grind. Like, she didn't stop. She was working as an actress, as a singer, and modeling, all on this hustle so that she could make it where she wanted to make it, inhaling her courage and exhaling that fear. So it's interesting to note that before working on Star Trek, she worked on Gene Roddenberry's very first series, which was named The Lieutenant, and that aired in 1964. In the episode which Nichelle Nichols was a guest actress on, the episode was called To Say It Right, and the episode dealt with racial prejudice. So even from the get-go, from just knowing this about on his first show, he was tackling these kind of issues, it already kind of tells you the type of person he was, just to want to write this into existence, which again inspires a new breed of writer. Because if around that time you're watching TV and seeing things that are on and you wanted to be a writer and you saw this on television, you would know it would be possible in the changing world, that you would see more and more opportunities open up for minorities and women to appear in major television shows. And if we look at kind of where we are now and the things that we see on television now, you can see kind of the remnants of the legacy that has left. But I think I will leave it there on Nichelle Nichols. Very brief, but I spoke about kind of the most poignant things of her career that I found most inspiring, that I wanted to share with people to find out and know more about. But before we end all this Star Trek mania, I thought it would be fun to talk about a few, what can I call them? A few fun facts about Star Trek that you probably didn't know. Which, I just found a few of them, I found them kind of funny. So the first point, since it's something that I spoke about on the episode, is that the first interracial kiss on US television was actually meant to be between Spock and Uhura. Because that's how it was originally written. But when William Shatner found out about the history that was going to be made from this moment, he and he found out that he wasn't the character that was going to be making the history, he was just like, nah, he got it changed straight away. So the first interracial kiss was between Lieutenant Uhura and Captain Kirk instead of Spock, which is kind of funny if you think about it. That it could have been between Spock and Uhura, but instead it was Captain Kirk, because that William Shatner, he didn't want it to be history to be leaving him behind. Nah. He wanted to be the guy making the history, which is kind of funny. Another fun fact from about Star Trek is that Eddie Murphy turned down a role in being in Star Trek. So apparently Paramount offered Eddie Murphy a contract to star in the Star Trek movie after his success on Saturday Night Live. And Eddie Murphy had also been open about wanting to be a part of the Star Trek franchise. But apparently multiple scripts were drafted and sent his way, but he wasn't impressed with any of them. With any of what they came up with. So he turned it down, and instead he starred in The Golden Child. Another interesting fact about Star Trek is that Stephen Hawking is the only person to play himself in Star Trek. So, as you know, like, multiple famous people or well-known faces have been in Star Trek, but Stephen Hawking is the only person to play himself. He appeared in the episode Distance, where Data, Albert Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton, and Stephen Hawking were all playing poker. Hawking is pretty much the jokester, while Newton is a total buzzkill. And then you can obviously find out who won that interesting game of poker if you find the clip on YouTube. Another interesting and kind of weird fact about Star Trek is William Shatner has never watched the series. So obviously it's not uncommon for actors to not watch their own work. But I mean, why wouldn't you? If you wanted to you can analyze yourself and see how you can do better. I don't know. Or see what you did in that performance. I don't know. I find it interesting as an actor, but some actors don't watch the things that are in, I guess. But I find it kind of crazy that he never watched Star Trek. It was so successful. He never thought, you know what, let me just check it out. So he basically he every day he turned up, he saw it as a job, turned up, did that job, and then went home. And then when it was on TV, he was like, switch that off. So the actor said in an interview that he has not even seen an episode of not seen any of the Star Trek movies, because he doesn't watch himself. And the final Star Trek fact that you probably didn't know was that James Doohan, who's the guy who played Scotty, was the person that created the Klingon language. So obviously, as you know, like, Star Trek, it's notorious for creating an entire language for the fictional alien species of the Klingon. However, this first came about when James Doohan made the grammar and the vocabulary for the language. Then they brought in a linguist, I think that's how you say it, linguist, by the name of Mark Okrand to finish up the language. So that's pretty cool. One of the actors on the show was the person that thought up the grammar and the vocabulary for how this alien language would speak, and then they brought in a linguist to finish up the language. So it's a fully fledged language that's been created for Star Trek and the aliens of Klingon. Which, who knows, there could be an alternate universe where this alien species is a real species of alien. And that could be the language that they speak. I don't know. But anyway, that's where we'll leave those quotes. And I promised you an answer to a question by the end of this show. And the question was, what is the strongest bone in the human body? Now, the strongest bone in the human body is actually the thigh bone. From my my random fact that I found today, it said that the human bone is, human bone, any human bone. No, the human thigh bone is, or the human thigh bones are stronger than concrete, which made me think, okay, if that's the point, if they're stronger than concrete, that means that as long as I land on my thigh when I'm tripping and falling, it will never break. The only way to really break your thigh bone, which is also called a femur. So if you ever hear the word femur in those medical documentaries or TV shows or whatever, you know what they're talking about. They're talking about the thigh bone. It's not only the strongest bone in the body, but it's also the longest bone in the body. And it also takes a lot of force, like a lot of large force to break or fracture your femur. And the only time you usually see this happen would be in a car accident, or if you were to be falling from a very high height, then you're possibly likely to be breaking your femur. Which is a cool fun fact about the body. One of the bones in the body is stronger than concrete. But other bones in the body are not. So whenever you're landing from a fall, as long as it's not too high, make sure you land on your thigh. And if it is, just hope you don't die. Not good sound advice, but I guess it rhymed. So, ayo. But anyway, I will call that the end of the show. So I hope you enjoyed episode 10. I'm saying it like a question. So, but I'm pretty sure I said at the start of the show that the last episode was episode 9. So this is episode 10, I guess. So I hope you've enjoyed episode 10 of The More You Know Mondays. This week I was talking about Nichelle Nichols. And next week I will be talking about, because you were listening to the previous part where I mentioned who I was going to be talking about, so I'm not going to repeat it now. So if you've forgotten, maybe you need to rewind some time and go back to that moment where I let it slip for who I was talking about, or you can just wait until next week. And with that being said, I will keep it moving and hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and goodbye.